The cardboard sign was already soaked through when Officer Daniel Hayes noticed its 5 shaky words written in black marker, swinging from a dog's neck in the falling snow. $5 for sale. But it wasn't the price that stopped him cold. It was what was being sold. A full-grown German Shepherd sat perfectly still beside a little girl no older than 9. His posture alert, disciplined, unmistakably trained. This wasn't a stray. This was a retired police dog. And the girl holding his collar was crying so quietly it broke Daniel's heart before she ever spoke. I share news stories here every day, and I would really appreciate it if you hit subscribe and liked my video. Now, let's jump back into my story. I sure you love it if you keep listening till the end. Snow fell hard that morning, the kind that erased footprints as quickly as they were made. Daniel's breath puffed white in the air as he stepped out of his patrol car, the cold biting straight through his gloves. Oak Ridge Avenue was usually empty at this hour. Shops shuttered. Sidewalks deserted, but today, something felt off. His instincts, sharpened by years on the force, tugged at him the moment he saw the small figure near the park fence. Write in the comments and tell me which part of the world you're watching this story from. I'm really interested to see how far this story has traveled. As he approached, the German Shepherd noticed him immediately. The dog didn't growl or bark. He simply shifted closer to the girl, placing his body between her and Daniel with quiet authority. His ears were up, eyes sharp, muscles ready. Daniel slowed, raising his hands slightly to show he wasn't a threat. "Hey there," Daniel said gently, kneeling so he wouldn't loom. "It's freezing out here. Are you okay?" The girl looked up. Her face was red from cold and crying, her lips trembling. She clutched the dog's thick fur like it was the only warm thing left in the world. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, in a voice barely louder than the snow hitting the ground, she whispered, "Sir, can you buy my dad's dog?" The words hit Daniel harder than any shout ever could. He glanced again at the sign. $5. For a dog that probably saved lives. For a partner that once wore a badge without words. Daniel swallowed and kept his voice calm. "Why would you want to sell him, sweetheart?" Her eyes filled instantly. Because my dad is sick," she said, "and I don't have any money to save him." Daniel felt his chest tighten. He had handled domestic calls, missing persons, violent scenes, but nothing prepared him for a child trying to trade love for survival. "What's your name?" he asked softly. "Emily," and his. Daniel nodded toward the dog. "Duke," she said, her hand tightening on the collar. Duke flicked an ear at the sound of his name, then leaned into her, steady and loyal. Daniel recognized that look in the dog's eyes. He'd worked alongside K-9 units before. Duke wasn't just trained, he was experienced, disciplined. "Retired? Your dad was a police officer." Daniel said, not a question. Emily nodded. Duke was his partner. For 7 years. The snow kept falling, blanketing the world in white silence. Daniel felt anger rise not at Emily. Not even at her father, but at a system that could leave a child sitting in the snow selling a hero for $5. "Emily," Daniel said carefully, "where is your dad right now?" "At home," she whispered. "He couldn't get up this morning." Daniel stood slowly, decision forming in his chest like a vow. He took off his gloves and gently placed them over Emily's frozen hands. Duke watched him closely, then relaxed just a fraction. "You shouldn't be out here," Daniel said. "And you're not selling Duke today?" "Not to anyone." Emily's eyes widened, fear flashing. "But I have to?" "No," Daniel said firmly, kindness wrapped around every word. "You don't? I'm going to help you. But first, you're going to take me to your dad." For the first time that morning, something changed in the air. Hope fragile, uncertain slipped quietly between falling snowflakes. And Duke, sensing it, stood a little taller as they began to walk. The walk to Emily's house felt longer than it should have. Snow creaked beneath their feet, and the wind cut through the narrow street like a blade. Daniel kept his pace slow, matching Emily's short steps. She walked with her shoulders hunched, one hand gripping Duke's collar, the other buried inside Daniel's glove for warmth. Duke stayed close, never letting Emily drift more than a step away, his body angled protectively between her and the world. They turned onto a side street Daniel rarely patrolled. The houses here sagged with age-peeling paint, cracked windows, porches bowed by time and neglect. Most of them were dark, their curtains drawn tight as if even light cost too much to let in. Emily stopped in front of the smallest one. "This is us," she said softly. Daniel's stomach tightened. The house looked abandoned, but the faint trail of smoke leaking from the chimney said otherwise. Someone was inside. Someone cold. The front steps groaned under their weight. Emily fumbled with the lock, her fingers stiff and clumsy. Duke pressed against her leg, steadying her. When the door finally opened, a wave of icy air spilled out colder inside than the street itself. Daniel stepped in and immediately understood why Emily had been so desperate. The living room was dim, lit by a single flickering lamp. Blankets were piled everywhere on chairs, on the floor, draped over furniture like makeshift insulation. A small space heater sat unplugged in the corner, its cord frayed, useless. And on the couch, wrapped in thin blankets, lay a man who looked like he was losing a battle one breath at a time. "Daddy," Emily whispered, rushing forward. The man stirred weakly, his eyes fluttering open. His face was pale, hollowed by sickness, his breathing shallow and ragged. When he saw Daniel, shame flashed across his features. "I told her not to go outside," he rasped. "She shouldn't have." "I know," Daniel said quickly, kneeling beside the couch. "I'm Officer Hayes. I found Emily sitting in the snow. She was freezing." The man squeezed his eyes shut. "I'm sorry," he whispered to Daniel, to Emily, maybe to Duke. "I didn't mean for it to get this bad." Duke stepped forward and rested his head gently on the man's knee. The man's trembling hand found Duke's fur instantly, muscle memory guiding him even in weakness. "Good boy," he breathed. "Still watching out for us, huh?" Daniel watched the exchange closely. This wasn't just a dog and his owner. This was a partnership forged under pressure, danger, and trust. "Sir," Daniel said gently, "Emily told me you were a canine officer." The man nodded faintly. 7 years. "Duke pulled me out of places I shouldn't have survived." He coughed, the sound deep and painful. "After the fire, my lungs never recovered." Emily climbed onto the couch beside him, careful and practiced. "Daddy, Officer Hayes said he's going to help us," she said, her voice hopeful but fragile, like glass. The man looked at Daniel sharply. "She doesn't need charity," he said, pride flaring weakly. "We'll manage." Daniel held his gaze. "With respect, sir, you're not managing. And that's not failure. That's life hitting hard." Silence filled the room, broken only by the man's labored breathing and the soft hum of wind sneaking through the window frames. Emily's voice shook. "The house gets really cold at night," she admitted. "I put my jacket on Duke yesterday." Daniel's jaw tightened. He glanced at the thermostat. Dead. No heat, no backup. "How long has it been like this?" Daniel asked. "A few months," the man said quietly. "I tried the programs, the paperwork, missed appointments when I couldn't breathe. Eventually, I stopped asking." Daniel stood slowly, his decision settling deeper with every second. This wasn't just a welfare issue. This was a ticking clock. "Sir," Daniel said firmly, "I'm not leaving you like this." The man shook his head. "Officer, you've done enough." "No," Daniel replied. I've done the bare minimum. And tonight, that's not enough. Emily looked up at him, eyes wide. You won't make us go back outside. Daniel knelt in front of her, meeting her gaze. Not tonight. Not ever again. Duke lifted his head at Daniel's words, ears alert as if understanding the promise being made. He stepped closer to Daniel, sniffed his hand once, then sat calm, steady, accepting. For the first time since Daniel stepped inside that frozen house, he felt it clearly. This wasn't just a call. This was a responsibility. And somewhere deep inside, he knew before this night was over, everything was going to change. Night settled over the house like a heavy lid, trapping the cold inside the walls. Daniel stayed long past the end of his shift, sitting in a straight-backed chair near the couch, phone in hand, making call after call. Every number led to the same place: voicemail, waiting lists, apologies without solutions. Emergency housing was full. Medical assistance required paperwork and time. Veterans programs promised help eventually. Eventually wasn't good enough. Emily sat on the floor wrapped in blankets, her back against the couch. Duke lay beside her, his body curved around her legs, sharing what little warmth he had. Every few minutes, Emily reached down to make sure he was still there, her fingers threading through his fur like a lifeline. The father drifted in and out of sleep, each breath rattling through his chest. Daniel watched him closely, noting the bluish tint at his lips, the way his chest struggled to rise. Years of training whispered warnings in Daniel's mind. This wasn't just sickness. This was dangerous. I'm sorry, the man murmured suddenly, eyes barely open. I never meant to put her through this. Emily lifted her head. It's okay, Daddy. I'm strong. Daniel felt something twist painfully in his chest. Children weren't supposed to be strong like this. He stood and walked to the small kitchen, opening the cabinets. Mostly empty. A few cans. A half bag of rice. No heat, barely food, and a man who could stop breathing at any moment. Daniel exhaled slowly and returned to the living room. Sir, he said quietly, if your breathing gets worse, we're going to the hospital. No arguments. The man gave a weak nod. If it comes to that? Duke's ears suddenly twitched. Daniel noticed immediately. The dog lifted his head, muscles tensing, eyes locking onto the couch. A low, almost inaudible rumble formed in his chest. Not a growl and alert. What is it, boy? Daniel whispered. Duke stood, sniffing the air around his handler, then nudged the man's arm with his nose. The man didn't respond. Dad. Emily said, scrambling to her feet. The man's chest rose once, then struggled. Daniel rushed forward, kneeling beside the couch. Sir, can you hear me? The man's eyes fluttered open briefly, unfocused. A wheezing sound escaped his throat, thin and strained. His fingers twitched against the blanket. Duke barked sharply once, twice urgent and commanding. He nudged harder now, pacing, circling, every instinct screaming. He's in trouble, Daniel muttered. Emily grabbed Duke's collar, crying. Daddy, please. Daniel pressed 2 fingers to the man's neck. The pulse was weak, racing, slipping. Years of emergency calls flashed through Daniel's mind. This was respiratory distress. Severe. That's it, Daniel said, pulling out his phone. We're not waiting. He dialed 911, his voice steady despite the fear punching through his chest. Medical emergency. Adult male, severe respiratory distress, history of lung injury, unstable vitals. We need an ambulance now. Emily sobbed into Duke's fur as Daniel gave the address. Duke stood rigid, eyes fixed on his handler, refusing to move, refusing to give up. Help is coming, Daniel said firmly, more to himself than anyone else. The man gasped again, chest barely moving. Daniel shifted him slightly, trying to ease his breathing, remembering bits of first aid training that suddenly felt terrifyingly inadequate. Duke barked again, louder this time, then pressed his body against the couch as if trying to hold the man in place, keep him here. "You saved him before," Daniel whispered to the dog. "You're doing it again." Sirens cut through the night like a promise. Red and white lights flashed through the frosted windows, bathing the room in urgent color. EMTs burst through the door, equipment in hand. "What have we got?" one of them asked. "Smoke inhalation injury," Daniel said quickly. "Retired canine officer. No heat, no oxygen support." Breathing deteriorated rapidly. The EMTs moved fast, fitting an oxygen mask, checking vitals, calling out numbers. The man's chest rose a little easier with the oxygen, but he was far from safe. "We're taking him in," the medic said. Now, Emily clung to Daniel's arm. "I'm coming, right?" "Yes," Daniel said immediately. "You're not staying behind." As they wheeled the stretcher out into the snow, Duke tried to follow, barking, pacing, refusing to be left. One EMT hesitated. "The dog he's family," Daniel said firmly. "He stays." They loaded the man into the ambulance. Emily climbed in beside him, tears streaking her face. Duke jumped in without hesitation, curling near the stretcher, eyes locked on his partner. As the doors slammed shut and the ambulance pulled away, Daniel climbed in too, heart pounding. Snow blurred past the windows as the siren wailed into the night. And for the first time since Emily had sat in the snow with that cardboard sign, she wasn't alone anymore. But Daniel knew this fight wasn't over yet. The ambulance rocked slightly as it sped through the snow-slick streets, sirens screaming into the dark. Inside, everything felt too bright, too loud, too fast. Machines beeped in sharp rhythms while gloved hands worked quickly over Emily's father. Oxygen hissed steadily, the only sound that gave Daniel any comfort at all. Emily sat rigid on the narrow bench, clutching her father's hand with both of hers. Her fingers were small against his, but she held on like letting go might pull him away forever. Duke stood braced beside the stretcher, paws planted wide for balance, eyes locked on his handler's face. Every shallow breath the man took, Duke mirrored with a tense rise of his chest, as if he could will the air into him. "Stay with us, sir," one of the paramedics said calmly. "You're doing good. Just keep breathing." The man's eyelids fluttered. His gaze drifted until it found Emily. A faint smile touched his lips. "Hey, kiddo," he rasped. "I'm here, Daddy," Emily said quickly, leaning closer. "I'm right here. Duke's here too." At the sound of his name, Duke gave a soft whine and nudged the man's arm. The man's fingers twitched weakly, brushing the dog's fur. That small movement seemed to steady his breathing. Just a fraction. Daniel watched it all, jaw tight. He'd been in ambulances before, but never like this. Never with a child watching every breath. Never with a dog acting like a living monitor, sensing danger before machines could. The paramedic glanced at Daniel. "He's lucky you called when you did." Daniel nodded once. Lucky wasn't the word he would have chosen. Barely in time felt closer. The ambulance screeched into the hospital bay, doors flying open before it fully stopped. Cold air rushed in, then bright hospital lights swallowed them whole. Nurses and doctors swarmed the stretcher, voices overlapping. Movements precise and urgent. Respiratory failure. History of smoke inhalation, a paramedic called out. Oxygen saturation dropping. They wheeled him away, faster than Emily could follow. "Wait, Daddy," she cried, trying to run after him. Daniel caught her gently around the shoulders. Hey, he said softly. "They're helping him." This is how they help. Duke barked once, sharp and anxious, then planted himself in front of the swinging doors, staring at them like he could see through walls. Emily's knees buckled, Daniel knelt with her, holding her steady as sobs finally tore free. She buried her face into Duke's fur, clutching him so tightly Daniel worried she might hurt herself. Duke didn't move. He just stood there, solid, warm, present. Minutes stretched into something shapeless and cruel. They sat in the waiting area, under harsh fluorescent lights. Emily's feet didn't reach the floor from the chair. Duke lay curled beside her, head on her ankle, eyes never leaving the ER doors. Daniel paced, then stopped, then paced again, running worst-case scenarios through his mind like a broken reel. If he doesn't make it, what happens to her? Where does she go? The thought made his chest ache. A doctor finally emerged. Emily shot to her feet, nearly tripping over Duke as she rushed forward. "Is my dad okay?" The doctor's expression was serious, but not hopeless. "He's stable for now," she said. "You got him here just in time. His lungs are severely compromised. He should have been treated months ago." Emily swallowed hard. "But he's alive." "Yes," the doctor said gently. "He's alive." Emily let out a shaky breath that sounded like it had been trapped inside her for weeks. She sank back into the chair, tears sliding down her cheeks in silent relief. Duke climbed halfway into her lap, licking her chin, tail thumping weakly against the floor. Daniel exhaled for what felt like the first time all night. "Can she see him?" Daniel asked. In a little while, the doctor replied. "He needs to be monitored. Oxygen, for meds. He'll be here for some time." Daniel nodded. "Whatever he needs." The doctor hesitated, then glanced at the chart. "There will be costs. Ongoing treatment, oxygen support at home." Daniel didn't hesitate. "We'll figure it out." After the doctor left, Emily looked up at him, eyes wide and scared again. "They're not going to make us leave, are they? We can't go back to the cold house." Daniel crouched in front of her, meeting her gaze. "No," he said firmly. "You're not going back there. Not tonight. Not like that." "But we don't have—" "I know," Daniel interrupted gently. "And that's okay. I've got you." Emily studied his face as if trying to decide whether hope was safe yet. Slowly, she nodded. Duke leaned into Daniel's knee. His approval quiet but unmistakable. Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing the city in white. Inside the hospital, a little girl, a loyal dog, and an exhausted officer waited together, knowingly standing at the edge of a life that was about to change forever. Morning crept into the hospital slowly, pale lights sliding across the polished floor and softening the harsh edges of the night. Emily had fallen asleep at last, curled on her side with Duke's head tucked against her stomach. One small hand still clutched his collar, as if even in dreams she was afraid he might disappear. Duke didn't sleep. He never truly did. His eyes stayed half open, tracking every passing nurse, every squeak of shoes, every sound from behind the ER doors. Daniel sat a few chairs away, elbows on his knees, phone buzzing quietly in his hand. He'd spent the last few hours making Colsom official, most personal. Old academy classmates, a retired sergeant, a friend who now ran logistics for a veterans nonprofit. He wasn't asking yet. He was laying groundwork. A nurse approached softly. "Officer Hayes." Daniel stood immediately. "Yes, your friend is asking for his daughter." Emily stirred at the sound of Daniel's voice. "Daddy, he's awake," Daniel said gently. "They're going to let us see him." Duke stood at once, tail low but wagging. "Ready?" The recovery room smelled like antiseptic and warm plastic. Machines hummed steadily, a sound that now felt like a miracle. Emily's father lay propped up slightly, oxygen tubing looped around his ears. He looked thinner, weaker, but alive. "Hey, Em," he whispered when he saw her. She rushed to his side, careful not to tangle the tubes. "You scared me," she said, trying to sound stern, failing completely as tears spilled down her cheeks. "I know," he murmured. "I'm sorry." Duke patted forward and rested his chin on the bed. The man's hand found his fur instantly. "Good boy," he breathed. "You knew, didn't you?" Duke huffed softly, tail tapping once against the bed frame. The man's eyes shifted to Daniel. "Officer Hayes," he said, voice hoarse. "They tell me you didn't leave." Daniel shook his head. "Wasn't an option." The man swallowed. "Emily told me. About the sign." Emily froze. Daniel met the man's gaze, steady. "She was trying to save you." Silence filled the room, thick and heavy. Then the man turned his face slightly, tears slipping into his hairline. "I failed her." "No," Daniel said firmly. "You didn't. You got hurt saving people. That doesn't make you weak. It makes you human." Emily climbed carefully onto the edge of the bed. "I didn't mind," she said softly. "I just didn't want to lose you." The man reached up, pulling her into a careful hug. Duke leaned in, completing the circle. Later, once a nurse gently ushered them out to let him rest, Daniel sat with Emily in the hallway. She swung her feet nervously, Duke's head resting on her shoes. "Officer Hayes," she asked. "Yeah? Are they going to make us pay a lot of money?" Daniel paused. He could lie. He didn't. "Yes," he said honestly. "But that's my problem now. Not yours." Her eyes widened. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Daniel said, choosing his words carefully, "that sometimes people help each other. And right now, it's your turn to be helped." He stood and walked to the nurse's station, lowering his voice. "I need to put the billing under my name for now," he said. "All emergency treatment, oxygen support, whatever's needed." The clerk blinked. "Sir, that can be—" "I know," Daniel said calmly. "Do it anyway." When he returned, Emily was staring at him like she wasn't sure he was real. "You can't do that," she whispered. Daniel knelt in front of her. "Emily, your dad spent years running toward danger. Duke ran with him. Last night, you ran toward help. This is what running toward each other looks like." Duke leaned forward and licked Daniel's cheek, slow and deliberate. Daniel laughed softly. "I'll take that as a thank you." That afternoon, Daniel stepped outside the hospital and made one final call. This time, he didn't dance around the truth. He told the story carefully, respectfully, without names. A retired canine officer. A little girl in the snow. A dog for sale for $5. There was silence on the other end. Then, "Send me the details." By evening, messages started coming in. Small donations. Offers of heaters. A veterans group asking how they could help. A canine association sharing the story quietly among handlers. Daniel returned to the waiting room and sat beside Emily and Duke. "Looks like," he said softly, "you're not as alone as you thought." Emily smiled, small, tired, real. And as Duke rested his head on Daniel's knee, the officer realized something important. This wasn't just about saving a life. It was about restoring a family. By the second night, the hospital no longer felt like a maze. Emily knew which hallway led to the vending machines and which nurse would sneak her extra juice. Duke had claimed a corner near the recovery rooms as his post. Lying with his chin on his paws, eyes following every gurney that passed. Daniel noticed how people slowed near them, how strangers smiled at Duke, how nurses paused to scratch behind his ears, how security guards nodded with quiet respect. The city moved fast, but here something softer had taken hold. Emily's father improved in small, precious steps. His breathing steadied with oxygen support. Color returned to his face. The doctor spoke of treatment plans and cautioned optimism, and Daniel held on to that phrase like a handrail. Cautioned optimism felt better than fear. Daniel spent his days juggling calls. He didn't wear his uniform now, but the badge still mattered, sometimes opening doors. Sometimes just reminding people that this story was real. A veterans clinic agreed to expedite intake. A local HVAC company offered a free inspection and repair. A grocery cop pledged monthly deliveries. None of it came from one place. It came from many like threads weaving into a net in the waiting room. Emily colored pictures of Duke with a blue crayon she insisted was hero blue. She drew Daniel too, taller than everyone, with a star on his chest that wasn't quite a badge. Duke watched the door while she worked, occasionally nosing the paper when she paused too long. "Do you think Daddy knows?" She asked once, not looking up. "Knows what?" "That lots of people are helping," she said. "I don't want him to feel bad." Daniel considered this. "We'll tell him the truth," he said gently. "That people care. That's not something to feel bad about." She nodded, thoughtful. "Okay." On the third morning, Daniel walked with Emily and Duke to the cafeteria. The smell of coffee and toast filled the air. A woman behind the counter noticed Duke and leaned over. "That's a good dog," she said. "He's the best," Emily replied solemnly. The woman smiled and slid an extra muffin onto the tray. On the house. Back upstairs, a nurse waved Daniel over. "Your friend is asking for you." Emily squeezed Duke's collar and followed. In the room, her father sat a little higher, eyes clearer. He looked at Daniel like he was seeing him for the first time. "They told me about the calls," he said quietly. "About the help." Daniel nodded. "We're putting pieces in place." The man swallowed. "I didn't want this." "I know," Daniel replied. "But wanting it and needing it aren't the same." Emily climbed onto the chair by the bed. "It's not charity," she said, echoing words she'd heard. "It's people helping." Her father smiled, a real one this time. Duke rested his chin on the mattress and sighed, content. That afternoon, Daniel drove to the house alone. The street looked different in daylight, less threatening, still tired. The HVAC crew met him at the door. They worked fast, tools clanking, breath fogging. A neighbor wandered over, curious. Daniel explained only what was necessary. The neighbor nodded and returned with 2 space heaters and a bag of groceries. By evening, the house hummed with heat. Daniel stood in the living room and imagined Emily on the rug. Duke stretched beside her, the windows no longer breathing cold. He felt something loosen in his chest. When they returned from the hospital 2 days later, Emily stopped on the porch. "It's warm," she said, surprised. It is, Daniel agreed. Inside, the air wrapped around them like a blanket. Emily laughed an unguarded sound that echoed off the walls. Duke trotted room to room, inspecting. Tail wagging in steady approval, her father settled into the chair, oxygen tank beside him. He closed his eyes for a moment, breathing. "I forgot what warm felt like," he murmured. That night, Daniel stayed until the lights dimmed and the house fell quiet. Emily insisted on making him tea. Duke lay between them, heavy and calm. "You're not leaving forever, right?" Emily asked, suddenly serious. Daniel smiled. "I'll be around." Duke thumped his tail once, sealing the promise, as Daniel stepped out into the cold. He realized something the city rarely noticed. Not every rescue came with sirens. Some came with patience and phone calls. And a dog who knew when danger was near long before anyone else did. And sometimes, saving a family meant letting a community remember how to be one. The weeks that followed didn't explode into miracles. They unfolded quietly in careful steps, like someone learning how to walk again after a long fall. Daniel visited every few days, sometimes in uniform, sometimes not. Each time, the house felt a little more alive. The heater hummed steadily. Groceries filled the cabinets. A calendar on the fridge marked appointments in neat blue ink. Emily's father grew stronger by inches, not miles. He learned to pace his breathing to accept the oxygen tank without resentment. Pride still flickered in his eyes, but it no longer burned. It softened. On good days, he walked to the window and watched Emily draw chalk pictures on the sidewalk while Duke lay nearby, guarding her shadows. One afternoon, Daniel arrived to find a small crowd gathered outside the house. A news van idled down the street. A woman from the Canine Association spoke quietly with a cameraman. Daniel stopped short. "What's going on?" he asked. Emily ran to him, excitement buzzing. "They're here for Duke." Duke stood tall beside her, ears perked, sensing attention but not alarmed. The woman from the association approached Daniel. "We'd like to honor him," she said, quietly. "With your permission." Inside, the living room filled with people who understood what Duke represented. Handlers, veterans, neighbors who had donated anonymously. Emily's father sat in his chair, oxygen humming, eyes shining with something like disbelief. They placed a simple medal around Duke's neck. No ceremony, no speeches, just a nod of respect. Duke accepted it with calm dignity, then promptly sat at Emily's feet as if to say his job was still the same. Emily clapped. "He looks handsome," she declared. Her father laughed softly. He always did. After the crowd thinned, Daniel stood near the doorway, unsure where to put his hands. Gratitude can be heavy like that, too big to hold comfortably. Emily's father called him over. "Officer Hayes," he said. "Daniel." Daniel stepped closer. "I need to say this," the man continued. "Not as a thank with those words feel too small. You didn't just help us. You reminded me how to ask for help without feeling like I failed." Daniel swallowed. "You didn't fail." The man nodded. "I know that now." Emily tugged Daniel's sleeve and handed him a folded paper. Another drawing. This one showed the house with yellow windows, smoke curling happily from the chimney. Duke stood in front like a statue. Daniel stood beside them, not taller this time, just there. On the back, in careful letters, she'd written, "Thank you for not walking away." That night, Daniel sat alone in his car longer than usual. He thought about all the calls he'd answered over the years. The ones that ended cleanly. The ones that didn't. He thought about the rules he'd been tanned. The ones that hadn't mattered as much as he once believed. A week later, the fundraiser closed quietly. It didn't go viral. It didn't need to. It covered medical bills, the heater repair, a few months of breathing room. More importantly, it brought letters. Handwritten notes from people who remembered the fire. From parents who'd watched a canine pull their child from danger. From officers who knew what it meant to lose a partner and still keep going. Emily read every letter aloud to her dad. Duke listened too, head tilted as if each word mattered. Winter loosened its grip. Snow melted into dark pavement. Buds appeared on bare branches. On a mild afternoon, Emily's father walked to the porch without stopping. He stood there, breathing carefully, and smiled. "Feels like a second chance," he said. Daniel nodded. "They're rare." "Not as rare as we think," the man replied. "We just don't always notice them." As Daniel left, Duke followed him to the sidewalk and sat. He didn't block the way. He just watched. Daniel crouched and scratched behind his ears. "You did good," he whispered. "You always did." Duke leaned into the touch, steady as ever. When Daniel drove off, he didn't feel like a hero. He felt like someone who'd been trusted donned had chosen to be worthy of it. And that, he realized, weighed less than a badge and meant far more. Spring arrived without ceremony. It didn't announce itself with headlines or sirens. It came in small ways: sunlight, lingering a little longer on the porch, the sound of children playing farther down the block, the heater finally clicking off for good. The house no longer felt like a place people passed through. It felt lived in. Emily's father returned to the veterans clinic twice a week. He hated the oxygen tank, but he carried it anyway, setting it down with care, like something fragile but necessary. Each visit left him tired, but never hopeless. He had learned the difference. Duke accompanied him to the door every time, watching until the car disappeared, then turning back to Emily as if to say, "I've got this part covered." Emily went back to school. On her first day, she hesitated at the gate, fingers tight around Duke's collar. Daniel stood nearby, leaning against his cruiser, pretending not to watch too closely. "I'll be okay," she said bravely. Duke sat calm and steady, eyes on her face. Daniel smiled. "He'll be right here when you get back." She nodded and walked through the gate without looking back. That afternoon, Daniel returned to his routine. Calls came and went. Traffic stops. Noise complaints. The usual rhythm of a city that rarely paused to breathe. But something in him had shifted. He found himself listening more carefully, lingering an extra moment before closing doors, asking one more question when his instinct told him to move on. He didn't save everyone. He knew that. But he stopped telling himself that saving one didn't matter. One evening, weeks later, Daniel received a handwritten envelope at the station. Inside was a simple note. "Daniel, Emily insisted we write this ourselves. We're doing okay. Not perfect. That's more than I ever thought we'd say again. Thank you for seeing us." Daniel folded the note and tucked it into his wallet, where it stayed. On a warm Saturday, he stopped by the house unannounced. Emily burst out the door barefoot, Duke racing ahead of her. Her father followed more slowly, leaning on the frame, smiling at the scene like it was something precious and fleeting. "Stay for dinner?" he asked. Daniel hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, I'd like that." They ate on the porch as the sky softened into evening. Emily talked about school and friends and a class project about heroes. She'd chosen to write about Duke because heroes don't always wear capes, she explained seriously. Duke lay at her feet, medal long since tucked away in a drawer, tail swishing lazily with contentment. As the sun dipped low, Emily leaned against Daniel's side. "You know," she said, "I don't think Duke was ever really for sale." Daniel chuckled. "No. I think," she continued thoughtfully, "he was waiting." Daniel looked at Duke, who met his gaze with calm certainty. Waiting for help, for someone to notice, for the right moment to refuse to walk away. When it was time to leave, Duke followed Daniel to the car again. This time, he stood and turned back toward the house on his own, satisfied. Daniel watched him go, then looked once more at the porch light glowing warmly in the dusk. As he drove off, the city lights blinked on one by one. Somewhere, another call would come. Another choice would be made. Daniel knew now that not every moment demanded heroics. Some asked for patience. Some asked for courage. And some simply asked a person to stop, look, and care. The house behind him settled into the night. Emily fell asleep safe and warm. Her father rested, breathing steady. Duke curled at the foot of her bed, ears tuned to the world, guarding a peace he had helped earn. And in the quiet that stayed, long after the snow had melted and the signs were gone, one truth remained, sometimes the smallest. Kindness changes everything. Thanks for watching till the end. Please like and subscribe and stay connected for more interesting stories.